I want to talk about a legal system that most people have never heard of until it touches someone they know, or until it touched Britney Spears, which is how the majority of Americans found out it existed at all. It's called guardianship. In some states, conservatorship. And the premise sounds reasonable. When a person can no longer make decisions for themselves, a court appoints someone to make those decisions for them. The problem is not the premise. The problem is what happens when the system is applied too broadly, monitored too loosely, and weaponized against the very people it was supposed to protect. And that is happening regularly to people who have no platform, no fan base, and no way out. Start with scale, because it matters. At least 1.3 million adults are currently under guardianship in the U.S. Some estimates are higher. One figure puts it at 1.5 million, with guardians collectively controlling approximately $273 billion in assets. That is an enormous amount of money and an enormous number of people, all of them legally stripped of some or all of their decision-making authority, overseen by a patchwork of state courts with varying standards and varying levels of rigor. And here is the thing that should give you pause before we go any further. The extent of abuse by guardians nationally is simply unknown. Court officials in multiple states have confirmed they cannot provide reliable figures because the data on how many people are in the system, how many are elderly, how many are experiencing abuse, simply does not exist in any comprehensive form. We are talking about a system that affects over 1 million people, controls hundreds of billions of dollars, and cannot reliably account for how often it goes wrong. That is not a minor data gap. That is a fundamental oversight failure. People tend to think of guardianship as financial management. And yes, financial control is part of it. But a full guardianship goes much further than that. Guardianship strips a person of their right to live their own life, to voice what their lives can and should look like. Once a person no longer has the legal right to state concerns or protest a decision made on their behalf, the erosion of their personhood has begun. In many states, guardianship automatically removes the right to vote. Since January 2023, at least 52 bills across 20 states have addressed voting rights and guardianship, but only 7 of those bills were signed into law. Most stalled in committee. People under guardianship can lose the right to choose where they live, who they can see and spend time with, what medical treatment they receive, whether they can marry, and in some cases, whether they can make decisions about their own reproductive lives. What these stories make clear is how vulnerable a person under guardianship becomes to someone with ill intentions, and how little power they have to protect themselves or regain autonomy. This is not a partial restriction. This is the removal of legal personhood. The abuse pattern is documented. It shows up in GAO reports, Senate testimony, investigative journalism, and eventually in a pop star's memoir. A 2017 New Yorker investigation documented a couple in Nevada who lost control of their lives and assets to a private guardian who obtained a court order appointing herself without providing any advance notice to the couple or their adult daughter. No warning, no chance to object. A stranger walked into a probate court and walked out with legal authority over 2 human beings' entire lives. That's not an anomaly. Guardianship is a big business. A substantial industry of professional guardians, complete strangers, is appointed by courts to manage the affairs of people who often don't know it's happening until the paperwork is filed. Court officials and advocates who spoke to the GAO noted that one of the most commonly observed forms of abuse was financial exploitation. The guardian controls the assets. There is minimal verification of the reports they file, and the person whose money it is has no legal standing to challenge the decisions being made. The GAO documented roughly $5.4 million stolen from people under guardianship over a 20-year period, and explicitly noted those statistics are considered unreliable because abuse is rarely reported or documented. The government's own accountability office is telling you the numbers are probably worse than they appear. because the system was not built to surface abuse. It was built to process cases. Those are two very different things. Here is the structural failure beneath all of it. There is supposed to be court oversight of guardians, but most states provide only cursory supervision. The guardian gets to decide how the person's money is spent without meaningful checks and balances. What does that look like in practice? A guardian files a report. The court may or may not review it carefully. Nobody conducts independent visits. Nobody asks the person under guardianship what they want or whether they're being treated well. The ward, the legal term for the person whose rights have been removed, has no reliable mechanism for raising concerns because their legal standing to do so has been stripped along with everything else. Many states have also lowered the legal threshold for placing someone in guardianship, downgrading the standard from incompetence to incapacity, making it significantly easier to be swept into the system. Easier to enter, much harder to leave. Minimal scrutiny in between. A law professor testifying before the Senate Aging Committee identified this as the very first fundamental problem with the guardianship system. Some people who are subject to guardianship should not be. The wrong people are being placed in it, and once they're in, the system does not have reliable mechanisms for catching that error and correcting it. Britney Spears' conservatorship lasted from 2008 to 2021, 13 years. As she wrote in her memoir, the conservatorship was created supposedly because I was incapable of doing anything at all, feeding myself, spending my own money, being a mother, anything. She was a 26-year-old who had gone through a very public mental health crisis. The conservatorship was initially put in place as a temporary measure. It was extended, then extended again, then made permanent against her objections. She earned millions of dollars during those 13 years. She performed sold-out tours, recorded albums, and appeared in television specials, all while legally having no control over her own finances, her own schedule, or her own medical decisions. The Free Britney movement and the documentaries that followed forced a public reckoning. California passed legislation in 2022 requiring judges to document all alternatives to a conservatorship before granting one and making it easier to end existing arrangements. California's Free Britney Act took effect in 2025, mandating stricter oversight and regular reviews. Those are real steps forward, but they are California steps. The federal government does not regulate or directly support guardianship. Every state sets its own standards, and in many states, those standards remain very low. The ACLU stated clearly that Britney Spears was only one of untold thousands nationwide at risk for guardianship or conservatorship abuse. The difference between Britney Spears and those thousands of others is not that her situation was more severe, it's that she was famous enough that people noticed. There are people who need guardianship. There are people with profound disabilities or severe cognitive decline who genuinely benefit from having legal support in place. That is real and it matters. But a system that removes every civil right a person has, their money, their vote, their medical decisions, their freedom of movement, with minimal oversight, no federal standard, and no reliable mechanism for catching abuse, is not a protection system functioning as intended. It is a system that was built for one purpose and is being used for another. And the people most likely to be caught in it, elderly women with assets, disabled women without powerful advocates, people experiencing mental health crises, are exactly the people who had the least ability to protect themselves from it in the first place. Britney got out. Most of them don't make the news. I'm Lil, and this is Lil Unfiltered.